どうか俺の妻になってほしい。
Who would have thought that things would turn out this way? But I have to admit that they do make a perfect husband and wife. And it's not just me. After spending some time with them, Raul, aka Prince Curtis, also thinks the same. I often think about the reason why Arnold married Rishe and how exactly is their marriage a political marriage? Because as Rishe said, political marriage is when both parties get something in return. But she doesn't fulfill any of his requests. Neither does she grant him any favors or get him any big kingdom as an ally. In short, she doesn't do anything for him while he accepts almost all of her requests. Though the answer to why he does all that is still unknown, but we will see them kinda argue and fight because of this fact. And last time we read how they had fun in the water at the beach. This time we will see them in action. And not to mention the scene where she will literally propose to him, just like he did, kissing his hand and asking him to be her husband, so that they can be even in this arrangement. We left off the story from the part where they were returning from the beach after their water fight, which would later become their secret as Rishe would return to the castle after being with Princess Harriet and greet a very disappointed Oliver, who would be complaining about how Arnold would always do something reckless when he's not with him, like jumping into the sea with his clothes on. Rishe flinched, then stiffly turned toward Oliver. Try as I might to pray the reason out of him, he won't say. I'm always telling him to take breaks, but I never expected such mischievous behavior. Oliver kept going without realizing that Rishe was the one who dragged Arnold into the water. Oliver, His Highness wasn't the one to blame for that. It was Rishe began, but Arnold called her name, and when Oliver wasn't looking at them, he pressed his pointer finger to his lips. She took it to mean it was their little secret. Though expressionless, he had the look of a child who just pulled a prank. Again, as I always say, I love this side of Arnold, along with the understanding side of him. Like he isn't someone who would jump to conclusion immediately and would always prioritize the safety and comfort of his partner. In this novel, we have Raul annoying and bothering Rishe, but the way Arnold deals with him is just so perfect. Raul is portrayed as a very cunning character, though he is shown as a dependent person who doesn't listen to anyone, and also the fact that he was clearly not working for anyone, not even siding with a single kingdom. So he basically plays any game he wants and however he wants, to the point that he doesn't even care about revealing his true identity. As he yanked Rishe behind a pillar and pressed her back to a wall, covering her mouth with his hand. "It's just the two of us now, little lady," he says. Unable to protest, Rishe glared at him. In contrast to Rishi's fearsome scowl, Raul smiled with satisfaction. "Those eyes are great, just my type," he flirted and released her mouth at last. "Is it wise to act like this while you're dressed as Prince Curtis?" she asked. "That voice is great too. Scold me more, would you?" He continued with his flirting. "You're incurable, you know that?" Rishe sighed at his mischief. He stared into her eyes, still holding her against the wall, and asked her not to show Harriet a new world because it would only make it hard for her to live like that. Then he asked if that was her plan after all. But Rishe knew Raul from her fifth life, so she knew how he always acts indifferent. She asked him to stop lying to himself and stop pretending that he too doesn't want the same bright future for Princess Harriet. But he cleverly changed the subject and asked, "What does your marriage with Galcan's crown prince means to you? How does a woman in political marriage feel? Do you fantasize about an old flame stealing you away during the ceremony?" He asked with a smile and continued with his husky voice. "I'll say it plain. I'm thinking about snatching you up if you don't want to marry the crown prince." She was so amazed by his proposal that she could only sigh in response. Then after a while she says, "I told you, you shouldn't put on an act like that." And he replied saying, "No wife will be happy in a political marriage. I never once wanted him to make me happy." Rishe argued, "I'm going to make a wonderful life for myself. No matter what distress may befell on me from marrying him, I'm not going to let it make me unhappy." She was determined, and she knew that even if she was dragged into a huge war, even if she died because of that war, she was not going to change her mind. She glared at Raul to emphasize her goal, and he just smiled. At that moment, Rishe noticed another person approaching. She hadn't picked up on it before because Raul had clearly stored up all of her attention. It was Prince Arnold. Rishe frowned while Raul still had her pinned to a wall, a hand tied on her shoulder, and his face was far too close to her. Blue eyes stared daggers at Raul. Rishe stuttered at the tense air that had settled around them. There was no hint of strong emotion on Arnold's face. His gaze was merely leveled at Raul. "Let go of her." It was a short phrase, but it rumbled in her eardrums. "I'm terribly sorry, Prince Arnold. I have no excuse for my behavior." Prince Curtis? Rishi frowned, worrying that Raoul was just inviting further misunderstandings with his choice of words. I apologize. It's just that your fiance's beauty is so dazzling. Seriously, what are you thinking? Rishi was starting to panic. Wasn't he supposed to be the eldest prince of Seagull right now? Arnold's slow footsteps echoed down the hall. At a glance, his behavior was no different from every day. But the chill in his eyes and the rigid bloodlust in his voice overpowered Rishi. I told you, let go of my wife. Is he going to kill Raoul? Rishi thought, panic raising even more in her. Raoul shrugged, then released Rishi. Arnold grabbed her as soon as she was free and pulled her to him. The prince looked down at her face and wrapped a gentle arm around her shoulder where Raoul had been gripping her. Did he hurt you? He asked, and she denied. Then he confirmed if he made her uncomfortable in any way or tried something funny. Rishi just shook her head and Arnold's gaze slid away. And the funny thing was that he didn't even spare Raoul a glance and began to take Rishi to her room. But as he took her hand, they heard a quiet voice from behind them. Your fiancée is precious to you, isn't she? If I were in your place, I'm sure I would kiss Lady Rishi to stake my claim on her in front of a would-be rival. Prince Curtis, that's enough joking around. Rishi tries to cut in. Or maybe I would cut the man down right here. It seemed that all the rumors about the cruel Crown Prince Arnold was unfolded. His needling was shameless at this point, and Rishi was beside herself, unable to comprehend his actions. Yet Arnold was calm. He regarded Raoul with a smile of utter composure as he said, I see, you must be here against your master's wishes. At that, it was Rishi who gaped in surprise rather than Raoul. The man himself was merely confused. Arnold obviously knew that Raoul was not the real Prince Curtis. You're a monster, he says, but Arnold was not interested in any of that, so he began to take Rishi to her room again. But Raoul wasn't done. Say, if she's truly important to you, don't you think you should let her go instead of forcing her into a political marriage? I think she'd be more thankful to you that way. Before Rishi could attempt to protest, Arnold beat her to it. He turned just his head to shoot a glare at Raoul, while still holding Rishi's wrist. No matter how much she hates me because of this marriage, I don't intend on letting her go. She will be my wife. His eyes were so sharp, much fiercer than they had been before. Suddenly, a deep sadness squeezed Rishi's heart, and Raoul's smile grew even more as he taunted Arnold. How awful, you know that you'll make her unhappy, but you'll force her to be your wife anyways, he says. To that, Arnold just agrees and begins to walk with Rishi. Scenes like these really wants me to know the reason to why he married her, but so far I'm clueless. But still, this is what I mean when I say that Arnold is a thoughtful and an amazing future husband who doesn't always start a fight, but he isn't perfect either. I mean, he doesn't understand that Rishi is in this relationship by her own will. And he's completely lost in his own head, thinking that he's cruel and selfish for keeping Rishi with himself, which is really not the case. And this novel really clarifies that, because after this scene, we got their first official fight. I'm sorry. He apologizes as soon as they reach their room and released her wrist. I shouldn't have been so rough. Rishi said nothing. Arnold apologizes again, but she thought that he hadn't been rough with her. It was true that he'd been rather forceful, but his grip hadn't hurt or left any sort of mark on her skin. And it wasn't Rishi's wrist that was in pain. Why do you say things like that? She heard the sadness leaking into her voice, but she couldn't put a lid on her feelings anymore. Don't worry, Arnold said gently. Just because I'm not letting you go doesn't mean I plan to restrict you. Rishi's head dropped so low that her hair fell around her face, and Arnold brushed it aside. I want you to keep telling me all your wishes. I swear to grant you anything in my power. He reminds her of his promise. But that wasn't why she was sad. That was not what she meant. He was clearly not understanding her. He said I was going to hate you because of this marriage. She tried to make him see her point. I did, Arnold confirmed as he tugged Rishi's coral hair behind one ear. You weren't afraid to marry me? He asked. It was as if he was comforting a child, and that just made Rishi feels like a spoiled girl who'd thrown a tantrum. She placed her hand over Arnold's. She couldn't bring herself to face him directly, so she just looked at him through her lashes. Your Highness, you're a fool, she says, and Arnold's eyes flew wide in shock. You're absolute fool. I can't believe you, Rishi said, although her complaints came weakly. I can't stand it when you're so nice to me, she says. Sometimes he was so cruel. Distancing himself through his speech helped him hide his true emotions, yet right now he was being so considerate of Rishi's feelings. How could I be afraid to be your bride? Rishi glared at him. Although she didn't want it to, she knew that she'd make an even more pathetic face if she didn't. She tightened her grip on his hand, practically pressing it on her cheek. I accepted your proposal, didn't I? Whatever happens, I will never hate you. There is no need for you to speak as if I will, she tells him, but when he calls her name, the throbbing pain in her chest increases. She reflexively pushes his hand closer to her cheek. While she didn't want him to see her face, she also didn't want it to let go. Do you feel an obligation to me because of this marriage? This time, Arnold broke the eye contact. Back then, I would have done anything to make you my wife. I was the one begging you, and you were the one making the decision. He traces Rishi's cheek with his thumb. Our positions were never equal, do you understand? Rishi shook her head. She in fact didn't understand it. He treated her like a child who didn't know anything, and she couldn't help but play the role. Rishi began to say something, but her voice was dangerously close to leaking all her pain. For every selfish request I make, I want to grant your desire too. She wanted to give back as much as she took. If this is supposed to be a political marriage, it's far too tilted in my favor. She explains and removes his hand from her cheek and wrap their fingers together. If there are things you want from me, then I want to give them to you, just as you've given them to me. She wanted to cry but felt so far from tears. Meanwhile, he didn't say anything. She looked into his blue eyes, willing him to hear her plea, but Arnold didn't avert his gaze, and his voice was still gentle. He tells her that he was not marrying her for a political reason, as he bent down and bring his lips to her ears, close enough to kiss it. She gasped, his husky voice tickling her eardrums as his breath tickled her skin. I don't want anything from you. You couldn't make me name something if you begged me. That really broke Rishi's heart even more. He pulled away with a smile, his gaze firmly locked onto hers. Then he asked, Do you hate me? And gently ran his thumb over her lips, as if he wished to pray the words out of her mouth. She was lost, with no past knowledge to rely on at this moment. It was so cruel of him to hide what he was really thinking. I knew and I could tell that him not wanting anything from her also came from the place of kindness. The way he says, no matter how much she hates me because of this marriage, he was truly prepared for Rishi to hate him. Then Rishi began to recall what else he'd said in the past, and her vision blurred as realization hits her. She didn't want him to witness her being any more pathetic, but she didn't want to just walk away from the conversation either. She slowly moved her hand up next to her head, palm facing Arnold. He didn't get her gesture, so she took a deep breath, apologizing to him. What she was about to do was terrible, but if she just walked away, they would continue talking in circles. She had no idea if she'd be able to do this right, but Rishi decided to initiate it anyways. Looking straight at Arnold, she declared, As of this moment, we're having our first fight. Several seconds passed, and then Arnold stared at her as though she were a complete stranger. What did you just say? He asked. I said we're having our first fight, she repeated as sadness clawed at her, but she squared her shoulders and made her intent clear to her fiancé. I mean, it makes sense for her to be mad once I realize how her character is like and how she already made up her mind to spend her life with him a long time ago. And though we might not know the reason to why he married her, this scene was very, very cute. And in reality, to Arnold, it was not even a fight. And to Rishi, she doesn't even know how to fight, because the same night, she brings him sandwiches, though she didn't deliver them herself. Instead, asked Oliver to do it for her, because she was fighting with Arnold. And not just that, she also wrote a mean message for him on that. The comment said, Your Highness, you idiot. After she gave the sandwich to Oliver, she could hold her head high and say that she was truly fighting with Arnold. But as soon as Oliver said that Arnold would be working late, she starts to feel bad for even writing that. However, she let it go, and after a little adventure, she returned to her bedroom, sighing to herself. I suppose Prince Arnold must still be working, she thought, alone in their double room. She finds the silence deafening, which just made her remember something else, something that she would rather not think about. The ghost. If you don't know, Rishi is scared of non-existent beings, and later we find out that there weren't actually any ghosts, but rather some men working under Raoul. Though right now she didn't know that, so in a flurry, she lit all the lamps in the room and fled under the cover. She snuck her head under the blanket, trying to escape from the crash of the wave. Still, she couldn't sleep, so she got up and out of bed, wearing the covers around her like a shawl. She went over to the bed that Arnold had slept in last night, and when she felt like she was surrounded by his presence, she let out a relieved sigh. I doubt His Highness will come back here, she thought, burying her face into the pillow. Her last thoughts before she fell asleep were about Arnold. She knew that he must be pushing himself, but worried as she was, she found it harder and harder to keep her thoughts together. She knew that there was no way Arnold was coming back, but she couldn't help waiting for him. A few hours must have passed by the time Rishi next opened her eyes. She felt someone's presence at her side. Arnold was sleeping right next to her. Rishi sprang up, thinking what Arnold was doing there in the same bed as her. Was that because Rishi was using his bed? He must have returned after finishing his work and didn't know what to do when he saw Rishi asleep. She didn't know why he hasn't simply picked another bed in the room, but regardless of the reason, he was sleeping beside her, and she was in complete fluster now. Did he do that because he knew I was afraid of ghosts? She thought and became almost sure of it. He had kept his promise that he would sleep with Rishi, and the thought just squeezed her heart. Rishi knew that she should return to her bed, yet she had a hard time making even the smallest move. But just then Arnold frowned a little, causing Rishi to freeze. Had he woken up? She thought, but he didn't move any further, and his forehead gets covered with sweat. She glanced at the window. It was shut, because she had been afraid to open it when she was alone. Arnold might have left it closed out of consideration for her. Rishi made up her mind to get out of bed. She feared approaching the window, but feared opening the curtains even more. She had a feeling that if she opened it even the slightest bit, she would lock eyes with something beyond. She clenched at the black sword she'd grabbed and kept carefully watched over the window. It's not a ghost. It's not a ghost, she kept telling herself. And finally, she opened the window, slowly, quietly, so that Arnold doesn't wake up. The ocean breeze came in, and Rishi exhaled at last and backed away from the window as soon as possible. She slipped back into the bed, let go of the sword, and settled back right next to Arnold. Then she peered down at his face, careful not to disturb his sleep. Sweat has plastered his bangs to his forehead. She wanted to brush them aside, but her hand stopped halfway towards him, because a hurtful voice escaped Arnold's lips. The sea breezes brushes against his sweaty skin, but his frown deepened. Maybe the sweat on his forehead wasn't from the summer heat after all. A moment later, her world flipped upside down. Something grabbed her wrist and pressed down on her shoulder. She sank back onto the bed, unable to lift a finger to resist, as a weight settled on top of her. Both her arms were pinned on either side of her head. Those icy eyes peered down at Rishi, widening only a split second later. Rishi kept her gaze on him, unresisting as he held her there. She let out her pent-up breath, went limp against the bed, and responded, "Yes, Prince Arnold?" He frowned, lowering himself over Rishi and collapsing on top of her. She asked if he was alright again, and he whispered an apology into her ear. She flinches and twitches at the sensation, but she couldn't move with Arnold on top of her. She could hardly even beg him, with him pressed so close against her. Still, she asked him to let go of her, and there was a pause after her request. Then Arnold's fingers came away so slowly that it seemed as though he didn't want it to let her go. Eventually, he sat up, freeing her. Rishi waited a moment before she sat up as well. Then she knelt in front of him, and with her newly freed hands, she pulled Arnold into an embrace. "Did you had a bad dream?" she asked. It was a question one asked of a child, but Rishi felt it was necessary. Even if it was rude and required some courage, she couldn't help wanting to embrace him. He would deny it. She was ready for that, ready to be pushed away. But he continued to let her hold him and lowered his gaze. "I was dreaming about the past," he said, and his hand slid around her back. "It all went away thanks to you." Now, he wasn't embracing her. In fact, he was barely touching her. But it seemed like a permission to Rishi, so she held on to him tighter. "I'm sorry, Your Highness," she continued, holding him and patting his hair. "It's because I made it hard for you to sleep." She apologizes again. Arnold huffled a short sigh and said, "This isn't out of ordinary." And then gently he added, "It's not your fault." Her heart throbbed when she thought about what Arnold had told her of his younger years. Did he dreamed about all those siblings being murdered before his eyes? The prince had gotten the scar on his neck when he was young, and there were many other things in Arnold's past that she didn't even know about. Then she decides to change the topic. The ocean. She stroked his hairs again. It was fun playing in it, wasn't it? There isn't much that she could do right now. She had no right to know about what Arnold had been dreaming about, no right to talk about it with him. But she at least wanted to take his hand and lead him somewhere far, far away from that dream. If Prince Arnold's terrible memories won't go away, then Rishi wanted to override them with emotions furthest away from the ones bound to the bad memories. However, his expression didn't change. But at length, he said, "When I remembered that beach was out there, it occurred to me that you might like it." Then he continued, "I don't understand, but when I think about what might make you happy, I feel like I can understand a little." He was opening up to her, and Rishi was not quite believing what was happening. He had once told her that he couldn't feel the same way about the things that she valued. To him, fireflies resemble the fires of the war, yet he wanted to show Rishe the ocean because he thought she'd like it. I'm happy that you brought me there. Rishe spoke slowly, pushing against the threat of her voice trembling. She searched long and hard for the words she wanted to say to him, but in the end, she was only able to repeat clumsy statements with, I'm so happy. She wanted to put her arm around him again so badly, but before she could, he pulled her into his instead. She was surprised, but she didn't attempt to push him away. He tightened his grip on her and bent down, whispering in her ears, you should resist more when someone shove you down or wrap their arms around you. I trust you not to mistreat me, Your Highness. And his lips curled into a smile. You believe me that much, do you? Of course I do. I believe in those feelings of yours. I'll tell you as many times as I can. I want to grant your desires too. Then she looked at him square in the eye and asked, will you believe at some point in you? He asked, no. She didn't mind if he didn't believe in her. There was something else that she wanted Arnold to understand. That it's okay for you to want things as well, Prince Arnold, she said, and he sucked in a breath and held her closer to him. I've never desired anything from another person before. His voice was husky in her ears. You're the only thing I tried to bring to my side, though I know I have no way to keep you there. There he goes with his negative thoughts again. And that familiar ache in Rishi's chest started to throb. Oblivious to her feelings, he whispered, be my wife? His words were soft as a kiss. I don't want anything more than that right now. She clung to his back and somehow manages to say, you're not selfish enough. And he chuckled at that response, saying, you can't say that when I forced you to marry me. He really did think of their marriage in those terms. It annoyed Rishe, and she pouted, I had the last say about accepting your proposal. Regardless of what she said, it didn't sit well with him. He laid a hand on her head as if to say she was wrong. If you don't agree to it, I still would have taken you. No matter what I had to do, no matter how much you protested. Rishe frowned and wiggled in his arms, trying to back away from him, but Arnold wouldn't let her go. Still holding her, he lays down on his side of the bed. She steadied his face and then reminded him, we're still fighting. He chuckled again and said, very well, as he tucked Rishi's hair behind her ear. I'll play along as you want. He wasn't even treating it as a real fight. That frustrated her to no end. But she couldn't protest because he was regarding her so tenderly. Just close your eyes for now. He put his arms around her again and patted her back. We can continue our fight tomorrow. She didn't think that was how fights were supposed to work, but she swallowed her argument and clung tight to him, closing her eyes. To her, fighting was so hard, and she does fall asleep thinking about what she could do to get Arnold to understand how she really felt. Honestly, that was one of the cutest fights I have read so far. There is more to this, and she did finally make him understand. But let me tell you a little something about the main plot involving Princess Harriet and Prince Curtis.